started. Good evening, everybody. So tonight, of course, we'll go ahead and continue on with our leadership learning and all that, but we'll go ahead and start off with prayer on that. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for all the wonderful many blessings that you have given us. Thank you for this opportunity to come tonight to study, to learn more of your word. We ask that the things that we said here, that we may be edified by it and encouraged from it for better Christmas. We also ask that you give those who have fallen ill this time, that they may be restored to a holy health. We also ask that you give those who are traveling, that they may reach the destination safely and come back to us. We also ask that those who aren't here this evening, that you with them, that they can come back to us safely and happy. Forgive us our sins and our sins and prayer. So, chapter 2 of this wonderful book. It's entitled The Omphax Herd Keep In, which this is something that Brother Pell, who wrote this book in particular, he kind of invented this type of curve to basically demonstrate a kind of a learning type of situation. And Sandy, since you just came in, a question we will come to at a certain point. If you could, while we're talking about this, kind of think of how you would answer these questions. But the question is, what did you understand when you were appointed an elder? What did you learn after you were appointed? And was there anything lacking or anything that was a little troublesome when you first got appointed as an elder? Or something to that extent. But we'll get to that here. So. Continuing on with that, of course, Brother Pell, in the second portion here, he begins by asking people he's been in contact with, preachers, other elders, and friends. And he explained to them what he wanted to do as far as putting this book into play, which is help elderships and maybe help other people become elders. Or at least have some spiritual leadership, something to that extent. But he also asks, what would make my book so compelling that you would buy more than one copy? And of course, he got a couple of questions and a couple of answers on that. One in particular would actually haunt him a little bit as he contemplated, because it's a kind of a difficult question to answer. So one elder asked him, how do you measure spiritual growth as an elder, a leader? How do you know if a sheep is growing in the Lord? How can you know? We can only see the outward, but we know God can see in a person. Jesus himself was also able to determine the great order of faith that an individual had, which we have that recorded in Matthew 8. With first, in regards to the centurion, starting in verse 8. And the centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me, and to another come, and he cometh to my servant. Do this, and he doeth it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled, And he said to them that followed, Verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in you. And of course, we see a comparison of that in the little faith department a little later in that chapter, in verse 26. At this point, the disciples and him get into a boat. He falls asleep. A great storm comes. And of course, the disciples were freaking out, thinking they were going to perish. And of course, from verse 26, he said, And he said unto them, Why are you fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and seas, and there was a great calm. As Brother Pell continues on with the lesson in this book, he understood what the elder was asking. He knew the motivation of that elder. That elder wanted to help measure his effectiveness of his actions on others. In pruning the bush, we want to know if we can encourage further growth or if we kill it. Tracking progress is easy, but can a father know the spiritual development of the child's objectively? Well, the answer is yes. But can a father know the motive behind those fruits? He goes to say what he learns, and he doesn't say it lightly, but it takes two beings who can measure a person's spiritual growth: God and the individual. As shepherds, we do the best we can by looking at the fruit produced, but we're handicapped in knowing the eternal struggles. However, with this in mind, Brother Powell creates a leadership maturity curve, which is over here. Hopefully, with it, we can help measure our progress in leading ourselves and others. Of course, he starts out like many before him. He found himself on this leadership curve, moving up and periodically stalled or going back down. So, this right here is basically talking about his own life that he's recorded in his own session. Now, according to this curve, he goes up to mid-teen, and around that point, that's the point where life starts smacking me in the face, saying you need to go get a job and drive a car and learn all these other gizmos that you did not do while you were a child. Learning how to get a bank account, learning about checking and savings, learning about 401k. You don't have a 401k, get one. Some of you might be a little too late, but still get one. Of course, later he was baptized into Christ, and interestingly enough, reading his book, he did start out as an atheist. It was for his wife that he actually did go to church, but I thought that was pretty cool. Anyways, so he's baptized into Christ, and of course, we don't see much of a divot on that part. But then we get to the marriage and the children part. I don't think I have to say much on that part, because marriage, first off, you're learning to live with someone who's not you. You're learning their likes, ins, and outs. I'm still trying to learn my wife's ins and outs, but yeah. And then children, yeah, that's a whole different ballgame, especially when they get teenage years. I do not envy those who still have small children. But when they get to teenage, watch out. However, it goes on as a big promotion at work. And this isn't the first time, of course, he's been promoted and all that. He's been promoted several times. But every time he hit that promotion, there's that big dip again. And of course, later on in his life, as we see around the 50s saga, he starts into the eldership gets appointed to the eldership, and we see a large dip right there. Because if you think taking care of one soul, or in his case, 4 souls, his wife and his 2 kids, was complicated enough, now he has a whole congregation to worry about. And probably other congregations as they go through. And of course, at this time, he gets a little older, tires, stage, writes this book. And of course, the rest of it's entitled Going Home. So basically, what is those particular divots mean? Well, of course, he's got it all charted out. Depending on what started first, the marriage, the children, promotion at work, the eldership itself. When you start something new, you're going to feel very overwhelmed. I tried learning how to code this year because I like making stuff. I like making comics, I like making games. I thought, hey, let's try making a video game. That is not easy at all. So, when starting anything new, it is very overwhelming. You start focusing on the wrong things. Shepherding is misunderstood. Of course, this goes a little more into the eldership type situation. But one eldership does not materialize. Too many elders become one, a eldership. And of course, complete acceptance by all sheep. Main thing is practice. And that's a major one. Practice. Study. Revise yourself. Main way is perfected. And of course, continuous improvement. Going back into my art thing, I've been drawing for over 20 years. I cannot draw a perfect circle to save my life. I need a program for that. Not once have I ever stopped improving. But that's the same way we need to be taking in consideration when it comes to our spiritual growth. We never stop improving. We always learn. But continuing on from his lesson itself. Starts out, many before him, himself on this leadership curve, moving up periodically stalled, going back down the curve, he learned very quickly not to fire someone quickly after making a huge mistake. They seem to have learned from the experience being so harsh. You ever had a situation in your life where you mess up so bad that you remember it for the rest of your life? I have. It's not fun. Even when you're a child, if you do something horrible, your parents get it. Both battles are not fun at all. No. They seem to have learned from the experience being so harsh. We can mature from mistakes because the lessons are harsh and not so easily forgotten. And of course, we will go on to lessons knowing that leadership maturity is difficult to measure objectively. However, even when the definition is being elusive, everyone knows when leadership is lacking. Going up the curve happens when we are lightened and made aware. Then we fall back until we figure out why we're not getting the expected results. When we realize that the wisdom comes from God, not man, we rapidly progress up the curve. And going back into art mode, one of the things that I learned from shading is most common amateurs will use a shading, which that technically is not what this is. See, the world is full of colors, so you have your opposite colors, which yellow, purple, orange, blue, red, or green. So whatever you're shading. For example, if you look into the sky right now, you'll probably see some yellow over the clouds, and darker parts will be purple. Opposite colors, contrast. So when I shade a drawing in particular, I don't use just white and black. I use whatever opposite color that happens to be on the day. If it's blue, it's going to be orange. If it's yellow, it's going to be purple. If it's red, green, vice versa. There's a nice little art tip for you guys. So with that, when we forget the mission, we quickly head back down towards the valley of new maturity. Maturity only has meaning when compared with a sin. Fortunately for us, the Bible tells us something about this. We think ourselves at some stage of immaturity. Using a grapevine metaphor, the Christian, or branch who produces fruit, must cling to the vine, Jesus, or be declared lifeless and only valuable as kindling for a fire. As we read in John 15, 5-6, I am the vine, ye the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch into the wither. And men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. Brother L calls this curve he invented called the Omphax curve. Omphax, Greek word meaning unripened grape. Unripe or sour grapes must remain on the vine until sweetness or maturity is achieved. Of course, this was invented and created from his experience as a parent, elder, manager, and observer on other elderships. The inset primarily deals with the eldership as the primary focus. Mature faith does not equate to being a mature elder in faith. There is much to know, and learning can only begin and arrive at the threshold of the office. And like I said, the improvement and the learning never ends. During Brother Pell's journey, throughout his professional career and ownership days, he looks back on the Omphax curve. He saw a downward trend every time he got a promotion. It happened when he least expected it, and when following through, he was usually met with a project or challenge no one had done before. He was qualified for the next step, but was not ready in many ways. Another, if not simple addition. Very currently, at my job, we stepped into a new responsibility where we take phone calls for anybody asking for credit for over 15,000 or higher. So, of course, I had to go through a week's learning of that the entire time, freaking out myself as, well, I originally had dropped out of this job because it was too difficult. I'm not very good at making decisions very quickly. More of a goes through type deal. But regardless, even going through the training itself, 8 years ago when I dropped out of it, it has become a lot easier. So it's not as scary as it was. Sometimes throughout our Christian walk, we sometimes unlearn what we know about leadership. Other times we have to stop talking and listen to what's being said. We primarily need to act more purposefully double check our thoughts, make sure what we are doing is right. The Omphax curve here was originally called the gun curve when we first came up with it. Of course, Brother Tell thought that might upset some folks. He said, hey, check out the gun curve. But I don't need to explain that. Never forget your immaturity. According to the chart, where is the most frequent dips in your imaginable maturity curve? Again, teenage years brings a certain realization of new responsibilities. You prepare for adulthood. Of course, Brother Bell was warned about how life would be, as much of us were by our parents. And again, I still remember my father telling me, wait till life gets older. It's going to hit you like a ton of bricks, and it does, constantly. No matter what the age or condition of life, the Omphax curve can be applied. Life is tough when we think we know it all, only to find our immaturity hurts the people we love the most. In the end, they are the only ones who know. How can we learn from books or counsel on how to deal with a new spouse? How can we learn to have time to devote to our children with all the deadlines we have to produce at work? Our knowledge counts more after we thought we knew all. Our society is overrun with people who never recover from their marriage or their workplace lives. As unfortunate as that is. We go up and down the curve all of our lives. They're still a little sour for someone's taste. Mature, and then we stumble. Being proper guidance. For some folks, some are fortunate to have mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, children to play. Or some don't have that blessing. But we must be mindful of those who think. We are challenged every day professionally. We remain Omphax or unripened grapes for sometimes longer than we desire, which is not a bad thing. We realize we have another level of maturity to gain at every age. We never will know it all. We thank God for overlooking our immaturity when we see it. And just to kind of add on top of that, again, every time you see any posts within drawing or anything thereof, people tell you don't judge yourself based on other people. You're going through your own path. You're designing your own creativity. You're creating things your way, your style, and everyone develops it differently. For example, if you ask me to produce a Bob Ross painting, it may take me a minute because that's not my style. That's not what I'm looking practically video games. But of course, Bob Ross, on the other hand, he was a traditional painter. He paint mountains within seconds. And it's ridiculous that he can do that. I'm jealous, but that's the side of it. Anyway, thank you. Yeah. And kind of a side joke on top of that as well. In my house, when you go up the stairs, there's a window. And I hate this window in particular because there's no blinds or covers or anything. So if our neighbor wanted to look into our house at night, But recently I found out he paid off his house. So every time I look through the window now, I'm looking at a guy who's got his house paid, and I'm like, man, I wish I had that money. That'd be great. But you can't compare yourself to other people. You can't. Hebrews 11:6. And without faith it is impossible to please him without belief. For he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. A process of new beginnings is essential for growth along the Omphax curve. Every day is a new beginning to decide who or what we will follow. Of course, some were fortunate to find out early in Psalms 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain to build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchmen keep awake in vain. And Luke 6:49. The ruin of the house is vast when we build on the wrong foundation. Kind of reminds me of a little child song. The rains came down, the floods came up. Foolish man built his house upon the sand, type of thing. Young and old must be guided, very similar to trees of sort. Young trees in structural pruning, so they grow straight and tall, while mature trees receive pruning for stability and relieve stress that often leads to fatigue and disease. There's a lot to learn in spiritual leadership: duties, roles, obligations, responsibilities. I sort of qualify to be an elder. Is that good enough? A common question that Brother Patel seems to have gathered amongst some Christians today: do you know what's going on? Now that we have new elders, why is everything so secretive? Where is the point? The day we become a Christian begins the preparation for church leadership. Suppose we grow in our faith. 1 Timothy 3:1. This is true, saying, if a man desires the office of bishop, he desires a good work. And we do become overseers. Of course, now we're novice or neophyte in eldership, lacking in a few or many things. This is true if we were an elder before, as this is a new place, new people, new things, yet even with the maturity of this experienced elder, still considered a novice. Sometimes we enter the responsibility knowing a lot about what to do. However, the sheer weight of the duties sometimes causes us to focus on the wrong things. For example, we need to concentrate on the what, get the why. Develop programs and forget about people. As an outstanding Christian leaders, but we cannot create one eldership. We thought we understood, but discovered it had nothing to do with our technical and managerial education. We do not know the sheep. We should not be surprised. Trust becomes a sacred word and can be broken between the sheep and the shepherds in ways we never thought. Leadership, you have to be careful. When Ethan comes up here and he does his sermons, he has to be careful. He can't just say whatever comes into his mind. I can't say whatever comes into my mind. There's a lot of people that are depending on this particular lesson, on these particular sermons, on the particular words of God to find their way home. Chart 1. Where is the training programs for elders? Where is the continued education once we're appointed leaders? Our people, elders. but they forget that the employees who carry the bulk of the load need encouragement. They also need to see the picture you were painting about the future. That is the picture. As I said last week, of course, with comics in particular, you have to draw a clear picture to represent and know what is happening in the camp, to know where the story is going. For those who are older with your experiences, some would say, I've just seen about everything. But it's those times where self-reflection is important. I'm 36, and I myself have gone in between the branching of VHSs to DVDs to streaming. I was there when the internet started first taking advantage of things. I remember AOL and its dial-up and its forever wait. I remember playing out in the yard when I was a child, and now that's barely seen as everybody's on their phones now. I've gone through quite a few events that I never would have thought was going to happen. For example, 9/11. That was not a great day. It was also very scary, and I had no idea what was happening at that time. We've gone through COVID. Again, another thing I thought I would never see in my life, as most of those things were always seen in movies. But that was an actuality. And of course, as we go throughout history and everything else, smallpox was actually very bad back in the 1920s. Of course, they came up with remedies for that as well. But I don't know what you guys say. Not just saying that you're bad at it. Don't hurt me. I'm not good at the speaking stuff. Yeah. There's been a lot of things, and I'm just 36. So I'm very curious to see what's coming down the future pipeline. Hopefully nothing worse. Just lives peacefully for the rest of their lives. That's what I'm hoping. The overall theme here is to help elderships of the Lord's church, one elder at a time, by promoting study, sound reasoning, and encouraging balance in elders' lives, thus assisting longevity to good elderships. We must begin to understand that the Word of God has been revealed, inspired, and confirmed, and is all sufficient for life's journey. No speculation can change the text or the meaning of the Bible. We're in good company as we have that historical document of disciples of Jesus Christ also struggled with their own Omphax curve. Of course, as we see them through the gospel, we see them knowing Jesus just barely off of the rim. It was, come follow me. And they did. They had no idea who this guy was. And boy, they struggled with faith, doctrine, attitude, and their time. Their maturity was tested till they died. Did they understand the entire premise of God's Word when they first started? No. Not at all. They were confused. They asked a lot of questions. Especially for the point. Were they ready to go and be constant watchmen? At one point in their development, were they ready to give an account to God of the souls in their trust? As we go throughout this historical text, again, we see that these disciples become apostles and then spend years on the battlefield, as it were. They traveled, taught, repented, refused, completed both Jews and Gentiles. And now, to the really quick discussion part. I guess I'll go with Sandy first. I guess some insight into the eldership itself. What did you understand when you were appointed an elder? What did you learn after your appointment? And I guess when you first became, what was difficult for you to overcome?
Well, yeah, I feel I was pretty lucky being here at Big Lum. And I had good friendship, and I knew his strength of belief. I think that really made this a much easier situation than I guess it could be in a lot of places. So working with another brother that, was focused on the church really helped everybody out. I mean, I knew the scriptures that talk about the eldership and what, that entailed. And, but I mean, I felt that, and I think we all did probably, we're continuing to grow where we need to be throughout our life. I think in this congregation, the way people get along very well, it's made it a much easier job as an elder. And I know places where there's a lot of drama, and probably seems like people really, I think in this congregation get along very well. I think that makes it such a easier, more important part to play. I mean, you learn everything. I mean, your experiences as you go along, you grow and learn, or hopefully do. And good lessons. You really learn a lot through studies.
Was there anything, I guess, not being too much detail, was there anything in particular that you found was difficult to learn when you first started?
Well, I really think keeping your focus, making sure that you got everybody, I think, is having a busy life. It's a big responsibility. Knowing that you're responsible for the church and other members. And that is, I guess, stressful, and hoping that you're doing what you can, to reach out and help people, and, that you're doing enough, that you're doing it the right way. I think that's probably the stressful thing about it.
Well, same questions.
Church here needed eldership. The reason we know that is because Bible eldership. Acts 14:23 says, Paul and Barnabas with those churches that they established in court elders every church. I think this we get that discussion, I think, before with elders. And sometimes we talk about it. Finally, a little history. Brother George Swift used to begin to read past on now. He actually lived right outside of Martin Jack Nelson. He got I guess not knowing that we need to get elder. Saw it. Yes, there were people that were coming in here. Some didn't want to do it because one man didn't want to do it because one child. Without maybe that would be a problem. Somebody. You think it's got to be, you must have children. And so there is sometimes more argument with that. Sometimes I don't think we did years before, I think it was Sandy Lee here, we were friends, still friends. There's some congregations that have elders that don't go along. That's really bad for congregation. I know one situation in Fifty County where a large congregation split because elders, some elders wanted to spend the money for building a home for the aged. While some of the other elders thought that that's not the first one to spend. But I just want to say, I know those people that were involved, but church needs harmony, and it needs welfare, it needs health, I'm not talking about physical health, but it needs spirit of God. And that's important. And I think, church, today, the lady that's coming here, she got maybe time or two. But that's okay. And, another thing, if you wanna know something, it's gonna be we're not, about going to tell you things. If there's anything you wanna know about how we spend our money or what we do, we're open, we ask. No problem, we're upfront, there's nothing to hide. God spent it wisely. I don't know if they get the problems we have, we take really good, spiritual problems.
I couldn't think.
No label, I know there's situations where they were done in the process. The reason the congregation, not yet a lot of the people are still worshiping together. And not getting along. Just happen.
And,
I noticed on this, one eldership does not materialize, or many others. Evidently, there was something going on.
yeah,
In the place he was at.
he, actually, both talks later on about these particular eldership situations where, unfortunately, nobody was getting along, and, that caused some rifts.
They could really be a downer for the congregation, for the eldership, of course, too, you know. That, results in that, but congregation.
Well, I'll leave it with this. So Brother Pell, as he wrote in his book, writes as his observation, he doesn't have all the answers himself, but he keeps himself in check by two quotes. King Solomon, pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling, Proverbs 16:18. And his second quote is from Golda Meir, Prime Minister of Israel from 1964 to 1974, which is, don't be so humble, you're not that great. So as we go on, perhaps we should construct our own Omphax curve. We may have to redraw it a couple of times, but the ride may get bumpy, both physically and emotionally. That's all I've got. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, we can learn from the past, but the most important thing is the present, where we are, where we're going in the future. But we can learn, and there's some things probably that don't need to put so much emphasis on in the past, except to learn.
Jim.
Designed that chart.
Design that chart? That was invented / created by the observation of Brother Pell when he wrote this book in particular. Brother Pell, the author of this book. He's been in the eldership for quite some time. So when he wrote this book, he genuinely wanted to help others with the eldership type situation. as far as like leadership within the church. Of course, this is from his own findings. He does not recommend that this is the final say-so of everything, but through his own life, I guess.
I'd hate to see our young people look at that.
Well,
The reason I say that
yeah.
is because they got on there, your baptism, being baptized, they got that over 20 years ago. Yeah,
I guess he was an atheist in for a while, wasn't he?
He was an atheist.
That's the reason I wouldn't.
I think most of the church problems with separation is opinions. I think the majority are. I don't think they doctrinal issues. As far as percentage wise.
We'll get into that particular lesson later on in the book itself, because he does kind of say where the eldership needs to, where we have one insanity, they need to include God into the mix, because they can't just vote on just Sandy's vote or Lung's vote. They have to have God's vote in there. Otherwise, why are you in eldership? But good point. Good point. But we'll be back here in just a short moment. But thank you for all this time.
Oh, that well is like I said, it's after a while it gets so lost in thought, you can really fall asleep. But that takes practice. I've fallen asleep on video